Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing well today. So today's webinar is going to concern timesheets approval. So the goal of today's webinar is give you certain tips to improve your timesheet approvals within your enterprise with Evolia. So let's jump straight into the subject. The first thing I'd like to go through with you is the different settings that we have for automatic timesheets approval and adjustments. So for that, we'll go over to the settings of an account, and then we'll go over to time and attendance. So over here in time and attendance, whenever we go over to smart time clock setting, we have many different settings that we can activate to improve the automatic approbation of the automatic approval of punches and time entries of employees. So the way it works with Evolia is that, let's say, for example, we did not have any adjustment settings. Um, if an employee were to be scheduled to work from 9 to 5, and they would clock in at, let's say, 8:59, if there were no rules to adjust, it would require an approval from the manager because the employee did not clock in at the time that was scheduled for them. But obviously, I assume that's not what many of you want. You want your timesheets approval to be more automatic, easier for your managers. You want to improve that. So there's many different settings that we can input into the system to automatically approve certain time entries. The first thing that we have is paid tolerance. The way paid tolerance works is that we can put a certain amount of time before the start of the shift and after the end of a shift. And the way it works is that, let's say an employee is supposed to start at 9. If we have 15 minutes of paid tolerance before the start of a shift, if the employee were to clock in between 8:45 and 9, it would automatically approve their shift since we put 15 minutes of tolerance. And it would be the same thing if the employee was supposed to finish at 5 p.m. and then they would clock out between 5 and 5:15 p.m. Then that punch would be automatically approved at the time that they punched because there is paid tolerance set up into the account. Um, then after the paid tolerance, we have what we call smart clocking adjustments. So smart clocking adjustments works a little bit like the paid tolerance. However, the smart automatic adjustment will automatically adjust the punches. So the tolerance, it stays at the time that the employee clocked in or out, as the adjustment will really adjust the punches. So let's say, for example, once again, I have a shift from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Um, and you see right here, I have 3 minutes before the start of the shift, after the start of the shift, before the end of the shift, and after the end of the shift. So the way it works is that, in that case, let's keep a shift from 9 to 5. As I mentioned, if the employee were to clock in between, in that case, 8:57 and 9, so before the start of the shift, that punch will be automatically adjusted to 9 a.m. And it's the same thing if the employee comes in 3 minutes late. Since I have 3 minutes after the start of the shift, it would automatically adjust the punch of the employee being late 3 minutes or less at 9 a.m., the time of the start of the shift. And then before the end of the shift, it's the same principle where if an employee clocks out at um, I'm sorry, 4:57 or between 4:57 and 5 p.m., it would automatically adjust their shift to 5 p.m. And then same thing after the end of the shift. If an employee in that case were to clock out between 5 p.m. and 5 and 3 p.m., it would automatically adjust it back to 5 p.m. So these settings you can edit into your own account and you can input the amount of time that you want. It's a free text mode, so you can input 4 minutes, 5 minutes, any amount of time that you like for automatic adjustments. You also have smart breaks adjustments. The way this one works is that whenever you schedule a break time amount in the system on a shift, let's say 30 minutes of break, if I have 2 minutes of smart break adjustments, then if the employee were to clock between 28 minutes and 32 minutes of break, that break would be automatically adjusted back to 30 minutes. So instead of you needing to adjust all the different breaks that go to 28 or 32 minutes, these would be automatically adjusted to 30 minutes and would be approved automatically. And after that, you can, if you do not want your employees to punch their breaks, you can activate this setting right here, which is called used planned break time when an employee does not clock their unpaid break. What this does is that when the employee does not clock the break that is planned on their shift, it will automatically remove the 30 minutes from their shift at the end of the shift. So they won't need to clock in and out of their break. And then we have another setting here for unpaid breaks where if the employee does not use the entire time of their break, it will automatically remove the entire time that was planned in the shift. So let's say, for example, once again, we planned a 30 minutes break on the shift, and the employee were to punch only 20 minutes of break. With that setting activated, it would automatically remove 30 minutes. Keep in mind that this does not work when the setting does not have any impact on breaks that would go over the amount of planned break time in the shift. So let's say, for example, I would punch a 35 minutes break. This setting would not have any impact. It would only adjust for breaks that are under the amount of time that was scheduled in the break. I can also apply the paid break. So this is for paid break, the next setting. I can apply the paid break if it has not been used at the end of the shift. So obviously, this is only for companies that will punch their paid breaks. So the way this setting works is that if you have, let's say, for example, a 15 minutes planned paid break and you require the employee to punch it, if the employee does not punch that 15 minutes paid break, it would be added as a 15 minutes extra amount of work time at the end of the shift. So the 15 minutes that was not punched as a paid break would be added automatically at the end of the shift if this setting is activated. We can also limit paid break duration. So what this setting does here is, let's say, for example, once again, we take a 15 minutes paid break and the employee were to punch 17 minutes of paid break instead of 15 minutes, then that two extra minutes would be unpaid. So those 2 extra minutes that the employee punched would be considered as unpaid time instead of paid because they went over the amount of paid breaks that you scheduled in the system. We also have a clocking rounding option. So what this does is that it rounds every punches to the amount of rounding that you've selected. So let's say, for example, right now I have 5 minutes of rounding, and I can go and select my rounding method for the start of the shift and for the end of the shift. So the three methods that we have is, first of all, to round, which is the default setting. The way this works is that it always adjusts to the closest 5 minutes of the punch. So let's say right now it is 1 and 9 p.m. That would adjust the punch if the employee were to punch at 1 and 9 p.m. to 1 and 10 p.m. And if that employee punched at 1 and 6 p.m., let's say, for example, that would be adjusted automatically to 1 and 5 p.m. We have the option to round up. So when we round up, it would always round up to the highest 5 minutes. So in that case, if the employee punches at 1 and 6 p.m. or 1 and 9 p.m., it would always be adjusted to 1 and 10 p.m. So the one higher, the 5 minutes higher than the amount of the hour that was clocked in or out, depending on the setting that you're going through. And then we have the option to round down, which would be the opposite. So in that case, if an employee clocks in at 1 and 9 p.m., it would adjust back to 1 and 5 p.m. And then if he clocks in at 1 and 6 p.m., it would adjust back to 1 and 5 p.m. Then after that, we have the possibility to disable automatic approval of adjustments. So if in your company you prefer all the punches to be approved, even though there's automatic adjustments in the system, you can always go and select this setting here to disable automatic approval of adjustments. So the adjustments will still work, but no punches will be automatically approved. They will all require verification by a manager. After that, we have the automatic clocking of consecutive shifts. The way this works is that if an employee has two shifts within the same day, you can apply a maximum gap between the two shifts where the punch out of the first shift of the day and the punch in of the second shift of the day will be done automatically. So let's say, for example, there's an employee working from 8 to noon and then from 1 to 4 p.m. So there's like a 1 hour delay between the shifts. In that case, right now, I currently have a maximum gap of an hour between the two shifts. So since it's an hour, it would automatically punch out the first shift at noon and punch in the second shift at 1 p.m. However, if the delay between the gap between the shift would be higher than an hour, let's say, for example, the employee would stop working at noon and start back working at 2 p.m., then that would be 2 hours. And since it's more than the delay that we applied, it would require the employee to punch out of their first shift of the day and then punch in into the second shift of the day. If you're using the mobile punch with geofencing, you can stop employees from clocking it outside the punch area. So if this setting is not activated and the geofencing is activated, if an employee punches out of the zone that you've set up in the location, it would still display the punch as an irregular punch in the timesheet of the employee. So the employee would be able to punch, but it would be irregular and require an approval by a manager. However, if you activate this setting, it would completely stop the employee from punching. So the employee cannot punch at all. It wouldn't be irregular. There would just not be a punch if the employee is outside the zone. The warning I would give with this setting and why I don't recommend activating it, I'm sorry, is let's say, for example, there's an employee that forgot to clock out at the end of their shift. The cool thing about that is that they can clock out at home and then put in the notes of the shift the reason why they forgot to clock out and the hour at which they clock out. So their manager can look at that and then adjust according to the note that the employee put in. If we do not let the employee punch outside the zone, they wouldn't be able to do that. The next thing is sometimes there can be cell phones with issues with geofencing where it doesn't localize the employee at the right place. Let's say an employee is using a VPN on their phone or anything like that. That would stop the employee from punching. Obviously, I mean, it's the employee's job to make sure that their location is correct on their phone. But it can happen that, let's say, on one day there's an issue with the geofencing of the phone of the employee and it wouldn't recognize the location in which they are. And then in that case, once again, the employee would not be able to clock in or out of their shift. So keep that in mind whenever you activate that setting. We then have the option to allow employee to work before a scheduled time. So if this setting is deactivated, is turned off, what will happen is that any time before the start of the shift at which the employee will punch, it will always adjust the shift back to the start time that was planned. So let's say, for example, there's an employee once again starting at 9 a.m. and that employee were to punch in at 8:30 a.m. It doesn't matter at what time they punch, it will always adjust the punch back to the start time of the shift, no matter at what time they punch, if this setting is turned off. However, if it is turned on, the employee, if they clock in at 8:30, it will leave the punch at 8:30 and require an approval by the manager afterwards. However, there is the possibility to activate that setting and then to enable questions about clock-in issues. So to enable them, you would have to turn off this setting, because if you were to turn it on, it would disable those questions. But the way these questions work is that if an employee, once again, were to clock in at 8:30 for a shift that was planned at 9 a.m., the punch will ask the employee if it is justified for them to clock in at this time. If they enter yes, they can enter a justification, and the manager will see the justification and the time of entry on the timesheet, and then they will be able to adjust or approve accordingly to that note that the employee put in. But if the employee were to answer no to that question, that it is not justified, then it would always automatically adjust the start time of the shift at the time that was planned on the schedule. So let's say, for example, once again, the employee clocks in at 8:30, but they were just there in advance because they want to take their coffee, eat breakfast. They're not really working for that 30 minutes duration, so they would answer no to the question, and their punch will be automatically adjusted to 9 a.m. in that case. And then if an employee is late, that would ask them a question as to why they were late, and they could put in a note for their manager's approval in the timesheets afterwards. We also have the same options before the end of the shift, so to allow employees to work beyond the scheduled time. So after the end of the shift, if this setting is activated, it's the same principle where if the question is activated and the employee works after, let's say, 5 p.m. In that case, we'll keep using the same example. They finish at 5:30. It will leave them at 5:30 if this setting is turned on, and then it would always automatically adjust them back to 5 if this setting is turned off. And then if this setting is turned on and they punch at 5:30, and that setting here asks the question, then they will be asked the question once again if it is justified or not. If they answer yes, they can put in a note. The punch stays at 5:30, requires an approval by a manager. If they answer no to that question, it will automatically adjust the punch back to 5 p.m. And then if they clock out before the end of the shift, a little bit like if they were to clock in late, it would just ask them a justification without any adjustments at all. There's also the possibility to enable questions about break issues on clock out. The way this will work is that if you put a break in the shift of the employee and the employee did not punch that break, it would automatically ask them a question at the end of their shift as to why they didn't punch their break. So they could say, well, I did punch my break, and then they could add in their break time manually. Or they could answer that, let's say, for example, they worked during their paid break, and then the manager would be able to, once again, adjust accordingly to the note that the employee put in. So those questions are really useful, but also keep in mind, I'd say that the bit of a downside is that it kind of makes it a bit longer for the employee to clock in and out whenever there's those questions, but it's also extra information for your managers. So it's really up to you to decide if you want to activate those questions or not. Honestly, I think it's a pretty good way for communicating issues with punch in and punch out, and make sure that there's a great communication for the punches between employees and their managers. But some enterprise, and I understand this issue, they have a lot of employees that need to clock in and out at the same console, for example, so they would like it to be as fast as possible, so they disable those questions. And then finally, we have the automatic shift closing, which I always recommend leaving on unless you have a really good reason, which honestly I can't really think about right now. The way this works is that if the employee is supposed to finish at 5 p.m. And they forget to clock out, well, if I put that 12 hours after the shift the shift closing delay at 12 hours, I'm sorry, if I put the shift closing delay at 12 hours, this right here, 12 hours after the end of the shift, so in that case, for a shift finishing at 5 p.m., so at 5 a.m., it would automatically close the shift of the employee at 5 p.m. at the time they were supposed to stop working. It will still require an approval, so it will be flagged as irregular on the timesheet. But then the manager will be able to prove it, and we'll see that it was an employee that forgot to clock out. The reason why I always recommend activating this is that if the employee forgets to clock out the next day when they clock in, instead of clocking out a 24-hour shifts and then creating a bit of mistakes on the timesheets, it would automatically clock them out at 5 p.m. and it would be easier for the manager after that to adjust and everything on the timesheet. And also the employee, when they clock in the next day, they don't clock out the end of their previous shift that they forgot to clock out. They would always clock into the start of their shift of that very day. So I always recommend activating this setting. Now let's go over to the timesheets and let's quickly go over through some ways, different ways. I'd say there's three different ways to approve timesheets in the system. There's two of them that I recommend over the others, depending on the way that you approve timesheets. Either you approve them daily, weekly, or even per pay period. But there's two different ways I would recommend, and the third one maybe a bit less, but it's still a way that I'm going to show you. So I'm just going to go ahead and create some shifts here in the schedule of an employee. I forgot to publish. I will publish this. And then I'll go over to timesheets. So the first way to approve timesheet is the basic way I'd say to approve timesheet. It's just to look through the timesheet and then approve the irregular by clicking on them and adjusting or approving the timesheet. So the way it works, and I assume many of you are aware, is that when there's a time entry that is irregular, it will either show in red for an absence of punch or in yellow for a punch that is irregular. So obviously this is a test account, so these aren't real employees, so I cannot have punches in yellow. But just keep in mind that if it is for an absence or an irregular punch, the approval, the ways of approval are exactly the same. There's no difference between both. It's the same way that you approve both these irregular shifts. So let's say, for example, I click on this one for Bruno on Monday the 1st, and I look at the shift. It says that it was scheduled at 9 to 5. I would see the punch time if the employee actually punched some time. I would see the work time, and then I could approve by just clicking on this button right here to validate, or I could click on the three dots and adjust the time entry. So keep in mind that these are always the two actions that you can commit on a time entry, either to approve or to adjust. So approve what is punched or adjust what is punched to the real time that the employee actually worked on that day. So in that case, we'll go with the simplest action. Let's say, for example, Bruno was really absent on that day. I would just go ahead and approve and validate the absence. And then it would validate this as an absence. It would put a green check next to the shift here and put 0 hours. So I validated the absence. But let's say, for example, on the next day, on Tuesday, Bruno was actually working on that day and he just forgot to punch. Then I would go ahead and click on there. I would click on the three dots and then I would adjust the time entry. So here he has two different shifts. So let's say we take this one, it's going to be easier. From 9 to 5, I would click on the three dots and I would adjust the time entry. And then I could either apply the scheduled hours by clicking on this option here, which would apply what is in the schedule, or I could change the paid arrival. So let's say, for example, I know Bruno came in a bit late on that day. I could put in that he came in at 9:15 because I know he came in at 9:15 but didn't punch. And then after that, once I'm done entering this information, I can also add in notes in the approval, in the adjustment. And let's say I enter late 15 minutes because of traffic. Once this note is entered, I can add this note to the employee's profile. So I can click on this checkbox here, validate. And then once I added this note to this employee's profile, well, first of all, the note is going to be visible in the day of the timesheet right here. But if I go into the employee's profile and I go into notes and documents and I go in notes, it would show here in the shift punch related notes that on the shift of the 3rd, I entered a note here that says late 15 minutes because of traffic. So it keeps an history of the notes that you've added in the timesheets of the employee from this specific box that I just showed you. So you can add notes for whenever an employee is late to keep track of those different reasons that the employee is late. And then you can check if there's certain tendencies for in certain employees to always be late because of the same reason. Then after that, um, this is one way, as I mentioned, to approve the timesheet. So to just go through, you know, each irregular one by one. But honestly, it's really not the method that I prefer. If you were to approve your timesheets weekly or bi-weekly or per pay period or for extended period of times, the way I would recommend to do that is to do one employee timesheet at a time. And the way this would work is that we would click here on this logo here to view the employee's timesheet at the end. So let's say we do Christian here and we go here. The way this works is that you want to do the adjustments that you have to make. And then once you do not have adjustments to be made anymore, you just approve everything. So let's say I know Christian on that week was absent every day except Friday, but he forgot to punch on Friday. I would just go ahead here on the Friday. I would click on the three dots. I would modify a clocking entry and I would enter the start time and the end time of the shift that he worked. So let's say he actually worked from 9 to 5. I would just leave it as 9 to 5 and click on save. So you see here it would put 8 hours work time. But all these four, I know that he was just absent. He was really absent on those 4 days. So I just want to validate all of those at once. I don't have to go through the three dots and validate one by one. I can just go and click on this button right here at the upper right portion of the timesheet that says approve. It would automatically approve all of the irregular time entries left in the timesheet of the employee. So here I just click on approve and I confirm. And then it confirms that the employee was absent for those 4 days. And then if for those 4 absences, I want to go and add a leave request to identify the reason why the employee was absent on that day, I could go ahead and click on the little umbrella logo here and just add a new leave request directly from here. And I could select, let's say, a personal from Monday 1st to Friday the 5th. I mean, sorry. Yeah, exactly, like this. Or Thursday, I'm sorry. So from Monday to Thursday. And then I would save. And then it would add a personal leave in the timesheet of the employee. So um, that's the way I would recommend to approve timesheets if you were to do it by pay period or every week. Because once you're done approving an employee's timesheet, you can either go in the previous employee's timesheet or the next employee's timesheet, and you can do one at a time, approve, then click on next, approve, next, approve, next, approve. You can approve pretty quickly one employee at a time. There's also certain filters in the timesheet that you can activate or deactivate to improve your visual of your timesheet. So let's say I would go in the filter here and I want to filter my entry types. I could filter by early or arrival or departure. I could filter by late arrivals, by departure after the end of time, by punches that, like I mentioned earlier, employees that forgot to clock out and that were auto clocked out by the system, employees that punched outside the zone, employees that were absent, time entries that were not validated, or time entries that are not locked. So this one is pretty cool here. Time entries not validated. So it helps you show the time entries that you have left to be validated on the period that you're displaying. So right now I have 2. It's a pretty easy way to view what's remaining to approve in your timesheets. And then if you go on the dashboard, this is the way I would recommend to approve timesheet if you were to do the approval daily. So this is something that you can do from the mobile app as well. So if you are a manager that prefers to approve on the mobile app, this is something that you can do as well on the mobile app. And the way this works is that we're just going to click here on shifts with clockings to approve. And always remember that your dashboard will always display the information for the amount of days that you're displaying. So currently I'm displaying on 30 days. So I will see the irregular clockings to approve in the last 30 days. So let's say, for example, I select only 7 days. You see here that my number changed from 3 to 1 time shifts with clockings to approve. So keep that in mind. you might be missing certain time entries if you do not filter your dashboard properly. But if you were to do it daily, the reason why I think this is interesting is because when you click on shifts with clocking, irregular clocking, it's pretty easy to view each one of them and just approve them one at a time or adjust them one at a time. So it's the same way that I showed you earlier. It's the same window. It shows what was scheduled, what was punched, and then the work time. And then you can either validate as it is, or then click on the three dots and adjust, which will bring you to this window here once again that I showed you earlier. So if you want to do your timesheets approval weekly or per pay period, I recommend doing it one employee at a time through the timesheets. And then if you want to do it daily, I recommend doing it this way through the dashboard, either with your cell phone or the web console on a computer. They both work really, really well. And from there, you can do the approvals in both these ways. But I'd say these are the two best ways to approve timesheets, in my opinion. So there's still some time left. I'd like. I see there's 24 of you listening, so thank you for participating in such a large number. It's pretty appreciated. Usually the English one has a bit less people, I will admit, but I think this is one of the English one I've done recently where there's a lot more people participating. So I appreciate that. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. It'll be my pleasure to answer those questions. So I'll leave you a few minutes to type out those questions if you have any, and I'll take some time to answer those questions. I'll leave you 1 or 2 minutes to type out your questions. Yeah. Don't be shy if there's anything that you'd like to ask regarding the timesheets approval. If there's no question, okay, we seem to get a lot of GPS glitch. Okay, yeah, Jules. We seem to be getting a lot of GPS glitches. Evolia says the employee is outside the zone, but when I pull up the map, they are logged as being in the zone. Is this an employee phone issue or something else? Well, Jules, it's a bit tough for me to get it without going through your account, and obviously I won't go through your account in front of everyone. But if you have any issues, technical issues, I would recommend contacting our technical support. So to contact our technical support, there's many ways you can do so. So directly through the platform, you can click on Chat with Support, and then from this window right here, ask your question to our technical support. They'll be able to help you with that. And if you prefer to contact them through email, you can contact them through the email address support@evolia.com. So I'd recommend contacting them if you have any technical issues. Okay, so Mike says, I got a question. You can just type in your question if you want, Mike. Irene, so we have had a few instances, I'm sorry, where the shift does not show up for approval on the manager's mobile view, but I can see them as outstanding in the admin desktop view. Once again, this is a tough one to answer, Irene, without really looking at the specific case. But make sure that there's no filters in the manager's view. Maybe the manager does not have access to the team of the shift that was visible in the admin view. Maybe the manager had a filter on that made it so they didn't see the shift. Maybe their dashboard wasn't set up properly with the amount of correct days. There could be a lot of reasons as to why it doesn't work. If you can't find out the answer to that, as I just said, you can always contact the technical support and they'll be able to help you with your issue. You should usually get an answer pretty quickly and resolve that pretty quickly. There's Bonnie. Is it better to create two separate shifts if you're working different times or use unpaid break? It really depends, Bonnie. So if the employee just works at the same location and they just have a break, I would recommend putting in a break. However, if the employee has a really long break between shifts, or they work different location or different tasks or positions in the different shift, I would recommend creating two different shifts. It's really up to you to decide. Both options are fine. But if it's a large break between shifts, I'd recommend creating two different shifts. If it's a smaller break and the shift is the exact same, so in terms of team's position and location, then in that case, you can enter a break. But if there's a difference in location, positions, or teams between the two shifts, always create two different shifts. There's Krista. Krista, in the timesheets, when I select the early arrival departure, only two employees show up, and we know there is more. So Krista, keep in mind that those filters, they will only show the timesheets that have not been approved yet with this specific exception. So if there's early arrival or departure that were already approved in the timesheets, they will not be displayed when you select the filter. When you select the filter, only the ones that have not been approved and correspond to this specific filter selection will be displayed in the timesheet. So that's something important. It's a great question, but I want to make sure to precise this. Christine, we appreciate the English webinars. Well, I appreciate your comment, Christine. Is there a way to adjust the view of the week by division? We have some staff that are paid Saturday, Friday, and some Thursday, Wednesday. Unfortunately, there is no possible way to have different pay periods or different weekly display per team in the system. This is unfortunately a limitation that we have in the system where it would be pretty complicated to have different pay periods. But it is, however, something that we've discussed many times. So it might be available in the future, but for now, there's no plan for near future to add that into the system, to be quite frank. So, Mike, your question is when my employees takes vacation leave, it does not auto cancel their shift. It says they are late and they're absent. Is there a way to fix this or override it? So, if you go over to payroll and time off, Mike, and you go over in time off categories and you edit let's say my vacation leave here in the system, in advanced parameters, I can decide a default action when a leave request with scheduled shifts is accepted. So when I change that default setting and I put it to cancel shift, it would automatically cancel the shift when an employee requests a vacation leave but have shift schedule in that period. Um, and then when you approve it, would automatically cancel the shift. So make sure that this is done. But keep in mind that if the leave request is created, let's say through the timesheets here, and I create a new leave request. And when I create a new leave request, I have the option to approve while creating. This automatic action that you've set up, this default action, will not be applied if you approve while creating the leave request. So keep in mind that this is only, the action is automatically done only when there's an employee approving timesheets after or a leave request after it was requested by an employee and not while it was created. Is there a way to have a punch in location and a punch out location? Unfortunately not. In a single shift, there cannot be a punch in location and a punch out location. However, what you can do is that you can create separate shifts in the day of the employee and put in the setting that I showed earlier in the webinar where you can clock out and clock in automatically into shifts in the system. So you can create a shift for the start location and a shift for the end location. And in that case, the employee would punch in at the first location and punch out at their second location. That's the only way that you could set it up. You cannot set up a punch in and punch out location in a single shift, unfortunately. Jules, um, This is a great question. Are you able to show us the new functionality that splits hours across different pay periods when an employee has submitted one long leave request? It's a great question. So I unfortunately have to leave. I know it was planned for an hour. I have to leave in 4 minutes, so I'll go through this quickly. But if you go into payroll and time off, and we go through time off categories, and then we take vacation leave, for example, we can make it, if the leave is in hours, we can make it so there's a leave distribution. So you can activate that setting here and make it so the leave will be distributed through the days. So here you can make sure that you've selected the days that you're open on. So if you're opened every day of the week, you can put in every day of the week. If you're closed on Sunday, Saturday, you could remove Sunday and Saturday. But what that would do is that when I would go ahead and create in the timesheet a leave request for an employee, a vacation request, for example, in that case, I would be able to split the leave request. Let's say, for example, it's from the 1st to the 12th. I think I selected the wrong one. I'm sorry. I'll go through settings, time off categories. Okay, no, I did. Oh, so vacation leave. Okay, I just didn't select the correct one. So it's vacation leave here. Yeah, this one. And then I would put from the 1st to the 12th, 1st to the 12th here, it would automatically split the hours of the request in my different days of the period. So let's say here, I have a request, I'm sorry, from the 1st to the 5th for vacation leave. It would then split the hours amongst the shift, and that will split it automatically according to the shifts that are selected. If there's no shift selected, if there's no shift plan, I'm sorry, in the period, it would not do that automatically. You need to go ahead. Let's say, for example, here I select from the 1st to the 12th, but I do not have shifts planned in this week here. I would go and manually enter here 8 hours in here, 8 hours in here as well, or not on Sunday, but basically I could go and enter manually the amount of hours that I want per day. So this is the way that it would work in the system. Um, can I do a report to see these stats? I'm sorry, I forgot what your questions are. When I select the early arrival departure, yes. Quickly, once again, if you export in the timesheet a timesheet report, this is a really detailed report of each time entry into the system. So when you export a report, you see the time at which the employee clocked in and the time at which the employee clocked out for each shift during that period. And then you can also see the information through here in the reports. If we go through the attendance reports, there's many stats that you can look in here directly from this report. However, this report specifically is only available in the operations module of Evolia. So you need to activate the operation plan in your account. And then quickly, just last question that I'll answer here, or two maybe. Bonnie asks, what about overtime? Does it automatically calculate it, or is that a different setting? So overtime is calculated through the settings here. Whenever you go to payroll and time off, you can set up your overtime rules through here, and your overtime will be automatically calculated through your overtime rules that are set up in here. So you can set up overtime rules directly from here. So you can put overtime rules that are daily, weekly, or per pay period. And Cheyenne asks, they work 3 different locations each night. Well, in that case, you could create 3 different shifts in the same day for the 3 different locations. That would be the best way to do so. As I mentioned earlier, there's unfortunately not, sorry, a possibility to enter automatically uh, 3 locations for a single shift. Then quickly, Irene, is there any timeline for leave requests to integrate with ADP or to remove duplicate entry? Irene, please send me an email about that. We'll plan a meeting. This is something that we've really recently implemented, so we'll be able to. I'll be able to discuss that with you in a meeting with you. So if you want to just contact me through my email, we'll be able to plan a meeting and set that up. So I thank you everyone for joining. I'm sorry I have to leave a bit early today. I appreciate your time. Really great questions. Love the participation. As I mentioned earlier, this was recorded, so you'll be able to view it on our website later on, early next week. So I appreciate you joining in for today's webinar, and I wish you a great day. Have a good one.